Hello and welcome to the Vince Unlimited channel. My name's Vince, and in this video I'm going to tell you all about the time I first went on the QE2, all back in 2002. I was so impressed I wrote a story all about the trip, and I thought you'd like to hear it. So settle back, have yourself a tea and biscuits, and listen to the story. Properly crossing the Atlantic. The story of a transatlantic cruise on board the magnificent Queen Elizabeth II. In some ways, we felt a bit of a fraud. It was only exceptional circumstances that led us to be able to savour the delights of crossing the Atlantic the proper way. Sure, we could afford it if we really wanted to, if a few other luxuries were forsaken. And we had previously figured out that one day we may part with 1,000 needed to make the trip. We would probably be a lot older. Much like the other guests queued in the bleak warehouse that Cunard seemed fit to welcome their clients on to the most sought-after ship in the cruise business. The few tricolour balloons did nothing to enhance the surroundings, and the shabby makeshift desks which processed us out of America seemed cheap and tatty. It was the last we would see of cheap and tatty for the next 6 days. We had an opportunity to live on board the magnificent Queen Elizabeth II ocean liner for a week at a fraction of the normal cost, and snapped at the chance with immense enthusiasm. We would travel the 4,000 miles from New York to our hometown of Southampton, living the millionaire dream. It was close to the first anniversary of September 11th, so the 1,791 spaces were only occupied by about 1,600 guests. We studied these travelling companions as we stood patiently waiting in line for our chance to be photographed for the onboard ID card. We thought we'd come to the wrong place, convinced that we'd accidentally stumbled on a Saga holiday outing. The average age, as confirmed later, was 65. Some of them must have lied. The waiting photographer hurriedly set up each couple and took his shot, standing next to an endorsed rubber ring with a backdrop of the bleak warehouse and the next impatient passengers. We instantly vowed not to purchase that picture and slipped quickly on board. When boarding, at a normal dockside terminal that is, one enters the ship in the room they appropriately called amidships. It's like a hotel lobby without the ceiling height, a circular arrangement of comfy-looking sofas surrounded by hand-painted murals depicting the major events of Cunard's illustrious past. A small sign prompted us to play Hunt the Cabin, a task that we were sure some of the guests were still carrying out on the 5th day. The cabin search took us to 3 deck. To the uninitiated, this is the highest row of portholes on the black bit. To the initiated, this meant dining in the Coronia restaurant. Although initially opting for nearly the cheapest of cabins, we had already been upgraded twice out of the Mauritania restaurant. Then, on boarding, we received a pleasant surprise that we were up another deck. The brochure suggested that cabin 3113 should be hosted a Princess Grill passenger, but we were still allocated the Caronia. We weren't about to complain. Our few £100 had secured us a cabin some would pay 10 times the amount for. Anyway, the standard tipping rate was higher in the grills. The restaurants on board are the first introduction to the quaint class divisions which the QE2 still proudly hung on to. The basic cabins and lower decks eat in the Mauritania. Not that this was a problem. The Mauritania resembles a 5-star restaurant, and all guests eat the same food anyway. The other restaurants and grills only provide fancier place, presentation and fawning. The next class up eats in the Coronia, and as an occupant for a week, we could declare that we wouldn't mind if we never ate better in our entire life. For those on the higher decks, the ones with the white painted exterior walls, the Britannia, Princess and Queen's grills await. Entrance to the esteemed Queen's Grill is subtly through the Queen's Grill Lounge, discouraging the general hoi polloi from gracing the presence of their onboard rock stars, captains of industry, and those rich guests secretly treating their lovers to a week or two of luxurious intimacy. One might like to note at this point how the company trades on its glorious past. The names of the old White Star liners, which merged with Samuel Cunard's own vessels, are bandied about with great enthusiasm. Mauritania, Britannia, and Coronia proudly adorn the restaurants. All around the ship, you discover maritime heritage artifacts from the most famous liners at the Great Atlantic. Although couldn't locate the Titanic bar. Ice with that, sir? Mind you, the careful marketing of the past is unsurprising. Even the vessel proudly claims to be a Cunard, when in reality it's now owned and operated by the Carnival Corporation. They're wise to keep Cunard more class, more style. Things moved surprisingly quickly on board. We expected a lot of hanging about and gentle moseying along Hudson out of New York Harbour, but the ship was built for speed and designed to cross the Atlantic in a shade over 3.5 days. The 6-day trip, taking the northerly route up the east coast of North America, past the coast of Maine and Newfoundland, before heading east to the UK, was created to allow those on board more than a couple of days living it up. But the docking and manoeuvring was well rehearsed and efficient. Typically, the ship would berth in the early morning and set sail before sundown. Considering the enormous tally of items to do in this time, including cabin swapping, provision loading, and static maintenance, we should all hail those individuals who organised the turnaround. Our guess is they train with the Ferrari's Formula One wheel changing teams. Mind you, a cynic did suggest that the daytime turnaround was due to the high cost of overnight berthing in New York or Southampton. Just pity the poor traveller who gets only 6 or 7 hours to see New York. However, 2 to 3 is quite enough for Southampton. We were scheduled to leave at 16:15. Unfortunately, this was a time that Herr Capitan decided that all new passengers on board had to prove they could master their safety equipment and get to their muster stations. We wanted to stand proudly at the head of the vessel and watch the magnificent splendour of New York's skyline drift away. But we're stuck at the muster point wearing a hideous shade of orange and sniggering at the few passengers who couldn't work out how to get into a life jacket. It only had one entrance as far as we could see. At least they'd found the muster station. Some were still playing Hunt the Cabin. At least the muster station for all cabins around 3113 was the pub. Only took a couple of minutes to derobe the orange lifesaver and return it to our room, then hair up to the observation platform. We got front row view. Don't be impressed, we only had to beat a few pensioners. Some didn't reach the front until we were in the Gulf of Maine. Not that we were at true front of the ship, or the bow, to hearty sea dogs. There was no imitating Kate Winslet in the film Titanic. The front deck area was off limit to the passengers, crew only down there. Passengers had to slum it in the rear. On the teak-covered multi-decks with the pool, hot tubs, and no chance of a freak wave given an impromptu shower. An interesting place to spot the well-heeled Atlantic traveller. They are the ones sunbathing, fully clad and wearing sunglasses. By the end of the 6 days aboard, we spotted quite a few pale faces with shiny brown noses. The other braver souls sat imperiously in the hot tubs. Quite impressive until their last-minute dash to recover the towel and dry themselves before the Atlantic chill took its toll. Then there were the swimmers, hardy individuals moved to try to swim in a heaving lake of semi-warmed seawater. At least you have been warned. We thought it freshwater until our first, and we might add, only open-mouthed dive. We returned to 3113, our home for the next week, a pleasant room of similar quality to a 4-star hotel. The cabin itself was quite long, if not wide, with twin portholes at one end. The main sleeping areas were separated from the bathroom by a walk-in wardrobe. We walked straight back out again and only went back in to use the fridge or safe. There was enough accommodation in the main wardrobes for our light travelling. The beds were single but well-sized and placed together. The linen crisp, fresh and white. The bathroom well stocked. Ben saw to that. Ben was, and probably still is, we would wager, a small, cheerful man, ready to dive into our room whenever it was vacated. Not that it was a problem, as he was the assigned cabin steward. Had he not have been, would have been less impressed with his eagerness to be there when we weren't. He ensured that the bathroom was cleaned and restocked, the vacuuming done, and the bed turned down at the right time. He even supplied champagne and strawberries on arrival, fresh fruit daily, and left a small chocolate on night on the pillow. Although we think everyone benefited from this, it wasn't just our friendly department. We introduced ourselves informally, but he duly ignored that by referring to our surname for the rest of the journey. His strict training didn't allow for such personal contact. Such was Ben's efficiency. We wondered what else the private butlers did for the penthouse suites. Ben even secured a mock credit card to allow us to operate the safe, a rather pointless design which needed a credit card to swipe it shut. As there was no cash transactions on board, apart from the casino, the best place to keep the credit card was inside the safe. We wish we had remembered to bring the Harrods card to waltz around with, or even the Texaco fuel card. The fridge was much simpler, needing only a short tug to get at the contents. Trouble is, there were none. No mini bar drinks or bars of chocolate. Room service would have to cater for such urgent necessities if we couldn't wait the long 30 minutes to the next scheduled meal. Meals, eating. That's what transatlantic cruising is all about. And boy, do they do this well. You have to be prepared to dress well to eat at dinner. So for men, judicious use of a tuxedo will be balanced with a smart suit. Unless it seems your great-grandfather was clearly very wealthy, in which case you need to buy a second-hand corduroy suit and sleep rough in it for a month beforehand. Not having a tux didn't prevent us from eating on the more formal nights, as the dark suit blended well, but we vowed to get one the next time we go. And you could wear pretty much what you wanted for breakfast and lunch. The first meal of the day was breakfast, served in your room or in your restaurant. It was a grand affair. Like all meals, the finely dressed waiters, personal to the few tables around you, presented a leather-bound menu. A touch pompous, perhaps, for 2 Weetabix and toast, but suited to the 5-course selection you could have. And the service wasn't any less proper because of the time of day. The napkin was laid politely on your knees, and one didn't need more than a nod to accept the grinding of black pepper onto the meal. Waiters even knew not to offer it on the cornflakes. The food was superb. The omelettes were light and tasty, the mushrooms tasted organic without the hideous manure twang, the bacon was served thick and tender, unless the crispy old dried Canadian version was requested. The only strange item was the oatmeal substitute, which resembled wallpaper paste to look at. Funnily enough, we never tried hanging paper with it. Felt it wasn't the time or the place. Breakfast usually finished around 10, if you started early around 8:30, so it was a long and arduous wait till lunch at midday. Again, the leather-clad menus were offered, but this time there were about 6 courses, if you felt so inclined. The future shape of our stomachs demanded that we take just 2, so we generally opted for the starter or soup course, followed by a main meal. We're not that into puddings and cakes. I paraphrase when describing the selections. The soup could typically be a coconut and lime consomme with fruits of the sea phyllo pastry ball, or something like that. Well, to be honest, nothing like that. If we were sous chefs, then we'd be well and truly sued. But the geniuses in the ample kitchens knew what they were doing and accordingly worked their magic to produce some of the best food we've ever eaten. Lunch typically finished around 2, so it's quite a wait until the evening dinner served at around 6:45. One might get peckish, so the crew rallied round at 4:30 to present afternoon tea. This we liked. It's the English in us. We all took our places in the Queen's room. She wasn't present herself, only her bust, but she would not have felt uncomfortable. We sat awaiting the stroke of 4:30 when all the waiters, dressed princely in their full whites, emerged, brandishing silver salvers ready to take an order for tea and coffee. Immediately following these were the next wave, offering finely crafted crustless sandwiches. The final onslaught offered cakes and pastries. The enemy was defeated. We all sat about trying to digest the food in time to get dressed for dinner at 7. Dinner was the most formal meal of the day. Head waiters would unveil the gold plaque announcing the gentlemen must wear jackets. No mention was made of trousers, but we didn't push the point. Our 2 waiters, Magic, a charming and professional man from Gdansk in Poland, near where to Lech Walesa famously toppled their government, and his efficient assistant, Anders, a polite, helpful Croatian, made a special effort to ensure our needs were well catered for. The usual placing of napkins and pouring of iced water were carried out, one on the knees, the other into the sparkling crystal glass, and always the right way round. Then the menus were offered, presenting another mouth-watering feast to savour, select and gobble up. Do order the fish if you go. Linda did, and Anders immediately offered to squeeze our lemon. At first we thought it may have been an unprofessional approach, but he pricked his fork into the lemon segment, used another to hook out all those irritating peps, then with the dexterity which would have made a card shark gasp, gently squeezed the lemon juice into a spoon. With 2 forks and a spoon, he carefully pressurized the segment into releasing its contents without squirting it all over the table. He only had 2 hands. We felt like applauding with ours. Of course, all this highfalutin doesn't suit everybody all the time. If you want a quicker feed or can't be bothered to change out those baggy shorts for dinner, you can always dine in the Lido. This was the 6th restaurant, had that noisy, tray-clanging feel of a summer camp. It was too casual for our liking on this trip, and the self-service seemed far too manual. Our money was paying for the fancy restaurants, so it's dumb to eat there. But that didn't put off many. It was always busy. We guessed that many of them, having spent all morning by the pool area, didn't want to return to their cabins again, then change for the restaurant. We were not a big fan of this place, except when they held the midnight feast there. The midnight feast was a misnomer. True, it could be a feast, and fairly unwanted at that time of day, but starting at 11:30 was hardly midnight. We think the guests may have gotten too hungry if they left it till actual midnight. But even if you were thinking of sleeping on anything other than your back, you had to go just for the spectacle. Not the magnificent ice and butter carvings, not together you understand, nor the spread of fresh salmon, crab and lobster, or even the wide range of cakes, pastries, breads and chocolates. No, the sight of 100 chubby sequin-clad ladies elbowing each other out of the way to reach that last strawberry. Well, they hadn't eaten much, we suspected. Of course, despite all this gastronomy, there were a couple of hours free to wander the liner. For the more adventurous, it was advised that 5 laps around the decks equated to a mile. This route was charmingly called the jogging track, although really it was the only way round. Not that many jogged. The quarter never ventured on deck, but further quarter were frankly the wrong shape for such activity, or quarter too old, and the rest were probably eating. The only jogging we saw all week was the races from the lounge to the Lido at 11:25. The other problem was that the front section of the ship was off limits to anyone wanting to maintain some sort of hairstyle. 26 knot winds in the mid-Atlantic can be very strong. Expect to walk at an angle of about 45 degrees. Other deck sports include the golfing net. A pity really, as we were expected to fire a few straight out to sea, straight off the deck. We presume that the environmentalists had their say and fear the Atlantic is being undermined by small white balls. Another option is soft tennis or basketball. Equipment was supplied, although we only saw one hoop, and it was far too high. Frankly, we're not the right height for this game, being less than 7'3". We did have a quick go at deck quoits, though. Well, you have to while on board, don't you? If you didn't want to brace the bracing winds outside, there was plenty to do to amuse inside. The theatre was used for the guest speakers, and ours include Elaine Strick of West End stage fame and a retired Concorde pilot giving an interesting illustrated talk about flying the most beautiful of aircraft at twice the speed of sound. One woman asked why it was that when she was on board she couldn't hear the sonic boom. Mind you, on deck mid-Atlantic we heard it pass overhead on one occasion. The theatre also dubbed as a cinema, where the latest releases were being played using full surround sound equipment. It was like being at the movies, in a rocking chair. But that's the nature of being aboard. Even walking the aisles, one tends to adopt the onboard swagger, moving along but gently veering from side to side. By the end of the trip, you've learned how to judge your own jaunt and nicely coordinate with the sway of the person approaching. At first, there's just a lot of incompetent leaping from side to side at the last minute, followed by the sorry, that's okay exchange. If you feel up to it, you're welcomed at one of the many onboard classes and talks. We noticed things ranging from computer lessons to needlework. Card games were popular and everyone had a quick go at the onboard jigsaw. Pity that all that was left was the complex bit of grass with all the bits looking just the same. We wondered how many people actually stopped and checked a few pieces, then trotted off, muttering that they could have helped if only had someone not stolen that clear white piece in the middle of the thatched house. A regular feature each morning was the art auction, conducted by two professional auctioneers who spent their evenings in the pub and who got increasingly friendlier with the audience as the cruise went on. Most pieces were described as lithographs or serigraphs, often of a limited number with the artist's hand signature. Many looked like they had bought them from Athena, except you don't find many hand-signed Picassos in Athena. The auctions were light-hearted and fair. There weren't many on board prepared to pay the $25,000 for Chagalls or Picassos, but a few of us bought minor pieces. Personally, we invested in Asterhofen original, wherever he is. At least he made sure all the numbers were fully covered by the paint. The auctioneer typically gave a 3-minute pitch on each piece. By the time they had finished, we wondered why they were selling them at all and not adopting the work as one of the family. All the frames were delightfully matched to the piece and glazing was included. The shipping prices were reasonable, and they even offered to provide an independent valuation for insurance purposes. All one had to do was bid. They would always start reasonably high, see if they could feed the idea of spending a fortune. "What will someone offer for this fine Norman Rockwell?" they would ask. $20,000? Silence. 10? They proposed tentatively. Still silence. Not even the faint sound of a nose scratch. 5? The audience front row tended to look around at this point to see if the others were awake or had left the room. Then a tentative finger would be raised. The skilled auctioneer would pounce on this communication. "Is that 1,000 to start us off?" 100 would be the reply, and after strenuous effort, the Rockwell would remain unsold. Not that everything went unsold. Fairly brisk business was made when the pieces were punted around the $100 to $300 mark, and the audience lapped up the original Disney cartoons, even if the prices were a bit goofy. Not all of the daily activities were quite so sedentary. We joined cruise host Thomas on one of his historic talks. Thomas was an interesting, ebullient character who seemed to work hard all week. His enthusiasm was tested by the itinerary he kept. We were never sure of his native country. At first, we'd assumed he was Scandinavian. The name fitted and strong accent seemed to fit. But then we saw he was holding elementary French-speaking lessons on another day. On another, he was listed as your German host Thomas, holding elementary German lessons. Linda had none of this and categorically said he was Spanish. Whatever his background, he knew a lot about Cunard and how to highly entertain and talk while whisking his crowd through the ship. About 30 had gathered initially at the designated meeting point, but we reckon only 25 made it to the first point of call in amidships to see him start the talk. He would enthuse about the humble beginnings of Samuel Cunard, whilst colourfully reliving the past. After a few minutes, he would say that we should all turn round and see the next exhibit. And when you did, he was there again, continuing the fascinating story and highlighting all the interesting artefacts on board. This was to continue throughout the guided tour, so we did eventually wonder whether there was more than one Thomas anyway. His tour took us through quite a few areas of the ship. As we went to each level, the crowd size visibly diminished. Not they were bored by the talk. You couldn't be. It's just at their age, climbing and descending all those staircases takes its toll. There were only 7 of us at the end, and that included all the Thomases. Thomas did recount a few stories of old, including the royal visits on board and the other famous passengers. He also said that the passengers were known for trying to steal things from the liners of the past, and in some cases actually tried to disembark with some furniture. Though we did not witness this spectacle, some people did appear to be keeping to this tradition. How else could the missing white jigsaw piece be explained? All in all, we had a wonderful experience on board, and although we have tweaked the nose of some of the traditions, our overriding memories will be good. And we did return. The crew, ably led by the captain, did us all proud, and we thanked them all. And just to put some icing on the cake, halfway across, we had an announcement that the ship had passed her 5 millionth mile. So we all got a certificate, a piece of maritime memorabilia to remind us of the journey. It made us feel like proper transatlantic travellers. No longer a fraud. Well, thank you very much for watching this video, particularly if you got here to the end. I haven't gone right the way through. If you enjoyed it, please press like, subscribe, and comment, maybe on your first cruise journey. But perhaps don't be quite as wordy as I am. We'll be all day reading the comments. Thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next video. Goodbye.